This episode's brought to you by Squarespace, the place to build a website if you need one for your brand, your business, or honestly, for whatever. More about them in just a bit. The decades following the dissolution of the Western Roman Empire were a time marked by chaos, constant warfare, and religious conflicts. But they were also a time in which young, ambitious leaders and small, upstart kingdoms could aspire to forge an empire of their own. These leaders would naturally resort to violence, even against their own kin, whilst seeking support from bishops and saints. In the words of Professor Paul Friedman of Yale University, it was a time of thugs and miracles. In today's video, we're going to chart the rise to the top of one of these alleged thugs, and how through a series of alleged miracles he created the first incarnation of a state that would dominate European politics for centuries. This is the story of Clovis I, King of the Franks and founding father of France. So let me start by giving you some context. Today's protagonist was born to Childeric I and Basina, king and queen of the Salian Franks, probably in the year 466 AD. But who were the Salian Franks, and who were the Franks? The Franks were a Germanic-speaking people settled in what are today northwestern Germany, the Benelux countries, and northeastern France. In the first half of the 5th century AD, the Franks living west of the Rhine started migrating further west and south, effectively invading the Western Roman Empire. These Western Franks became known as the Salian Franks, and their leaders would become allies of Rome and fight as generals against enemies of the empire. The Salian Franks were not a united national entity, however, as they were split into small kingdoms. One of these, centered around Tournai, modern-day Belgium, was led by King Merovech, who had fought the Huns alongside Roman general Aetius. Merovech was the initiator of the dynasty later known as the Merovingians, a bloodline which would rule over France until the 8th century. When he died around 458, he was succeeded by his son Childeric. In 466, Childeric and Basina welcomed their firstborn son, later followed by 3 daughters, Audofleda, Lenthechilde, and Albofleda. For their only son, the king and queen went for a proper masculine name, Ludwig. This can be translated as renowned in battle. The name was rendered as Hlodovechus in Latin, and later historians simplified it to Clovis. But the same name adopted different regional variants, morphing into Ludwig or Louis, a name which would become very popular with French kings. Confused? Great, you should be. So let's simplify things by just calling the boy Clovis, shall we? Now, we don't know very much about his early years, but we know that Franks taught their boys to fight from a very early age. In fact, archaeologists have found several tombs of Salian children as young as 5 being buried with weapons. Now, we could also speculate that Childeric may have trained Clovis to become a ruler and a military leader from an early age. Therefore, the preteen Clovis may have been aware of the tumultuous events that had been shaking the Western Roman Empire. At the age of 10, in the year 476, he may have heard the news of how Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor, had been overthrown. And in later years, his father may have explained to him how the dissolved Western Empire had been carved into smaller kingdoms led by people such as the Alemanni, the Burgundians, the Ostrogoths, the Saxons, the Visigoths, and even their fellow Franks east of the Rhine, the Ripuarian Franks. These new polities were far from friendly, and in fact Childeric had to defend his Salian kingdom against Visigoth and Saxon incursions. Alas, Childeric did not have much time to tutor his son, as he died in 481. Childeric was buried in Tournai alongside 15 horses, weapons, gold, and jewelry, as does befit a king. Clovis, barely 15 years old, succeeded him on the throne, but the young Frank was already politically savvy, and he knew that his authority at such a young age could easily be questioned. At his father's funeral, he took the occasion to shower the top military leaders in the kingdom with gifts and banquets to secure their cooperation. Shortly afterwards, he married his first wife, whose name has been lost to history, another wise political move aimed at perpetuating his dynasty. The young king, much like his father, was surrounded by potentially hostile nations. To his immediate south lay a rump Gallo-Roman state ruled by former General Syagrius. Right next to Syagrius, the Burgundians controlled the Rhone Valley. Further south, the Visigoths held sway over the kingdom of Toulouse, which encompassed much of southern France and part of northern Spain. Finally, the Alemanni, a group of German tribes, occupied modern-day Alsace. But unlike his father, Clovis would not simply defend his kingdom. He would muster his allies and relatives amongst the Salians and move on the attack. Clovis's life and campaigns have been narrated by the bishop and historian Gregory of Tours in his History of the Franks. Gregory is our main source about Clovis, but unfortunately, he doesn't give us much explanation of his motives. All he writes is that in 486, Clovis allied himself with his cousins Ragnachar and Charik, themselves rulers of small kingdoms, and they invaded Syagrius' territory. The Salian king challenged his foe to battle, and Syagrius duly accepted. The armies crashed in the Battle of Soissons, northeast of Paris. During the encounter, Ragnachar fought alongside Clovis, while the opportunistic Charik held back his men, waiting to support whoever emerged victorious. There are no descriptions of this battle, but we can infer the tactics used by Clovis from later accounts about the Frankish warriors written by historian Procopius. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the Franks were probably the finest cavalry in Europe, but in the 5th century, they fought mostly on foot, wielding swords, shields, and axes. Frankish soldiers closed in on the enemy infantry, then threw their battle axes to shatter their shields. They then launched a devastating charge, rushing the defenseless forces. This is probably how Clovis and Ragnachar crushed Syagrius at Soissons. The defeated general fled to Toulouse, seeking refuge with the Visigoths. Their king, Alaric, was not too happy to keep his guest and kicked him back over to Clovis. The Salian king kept Syagrius prisoner for a while and eventually executed him. He then completed the conquest of his territories, which included the city of Paris. While raiding the land, Clovis and his soldiers pillaged several churches. At this time, most Salian Franks were still pagan and showed little respect towards Christianity. According to Gregory, during one of these raids, the Franks seized a veritable treasure from a church which contained a vase of wonderful size and beauty. A local bishop asked for the vase to be returned, and Clovis asked his men to comply, but one of them refused. It was Frankish tradition for a king to share half of the booty with his men. Thus, a foolish and envious and excitable fellow split the vase in two with his axe and insultingly gave to Clovis only one half of the artifact. The king endured the insult with patience, but weeks later he met the rebellious soldier again. Clovis snatched his axe from his hands and threw it onto the floor. As the soldier bent to pick it up, Clovis lifted his own axe and split the soldier's head in two. Some patience. Now, just before we continue with today's video, I'm going to interrupt it and tell you about one of our favorite sponsors, Squarespace. Squarespace is the absolute best place to build a website. If you need a website, don't even consider anyone else. If you thought, I need a website for my business, where shall I make it? The answer is Squarespace. Why? Because websites are ridiculously easy to make and feature-rich with Squarespace. Look, imagine this situation, you know nothing about websites. You love looking at them. You know ones that look good and work quite well, have neat features. And now imagine that you need one of those websites. Maybe you want to bring your old business website up to date, so it doesn't look like it was made back in 2013. Or maybe you've got an idea for a brand new business. You've got an idea for whatever. It doesn't matter. You should build it with Squarespace. And that's right, Squarespace doesn't just do blogs, which they do beautifully, by the way. You can also sell things through Squarespace, which, is good if you want to have a business online. Or maybe you just want to sell memberships to your online yoga class. Or maybe you just want to do a blog. Squarespace handles it all. Plus email campaigns, analytics, social integrations, all of that usual stuff that you'd expect. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/biographics. You're at 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now back to today's video. So, Clovis had hit the ground running. At the tender age of 20, the Salian king had defeated a large Roman enclave, conquered Paris, and split some heads along the way. Not much has been written about his life in the 480s and early 490s. We know that sometime between 493 and 499, Clovis took a second wife named Clotilde. It's not clear if his first unnamed wife had died in the meantime or if they'd separated. The second Mrs. Clovis was daughter of Chilperic, brother to Gundobad, king of the Burgundians. Clearly, the marriage was politically motivated, a way to cement an alliance with another powerful kingdom. Now, Clotilde, unlike her husband, was a Christian and aligned with the Catholic faith. This also set her apart from other converted barbarian peoples, such as the Visigoths, who followed the Arian heresy. To clarify, this heresy originated with preacher Arius of Alexandria. Arius did not believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, considered to be a creature of God. On the other hand, Catholicism considers Christ to be an incarnation of God as a human being. Since the start of their marriage, Clotilde tried to convince Clovis to convert to the one and true faith, but with little success. When the couple welcomes their firstborn son, Ignomer, Clotilde insisted upon baptizing him. Unfortunately, the baby boy fell ill and died, which infuriated Clovis, who said if the boy had been dedicated in the name of my gods, he would certainly have lived. The second boy was born, Clodomir, and also, in this case, Clotilde had him baptized. Clodomir too fell ill, but Gregory of Tours tells us that Clotilde saved him through his prayers. This may have softened Clovis' stance towards Christianity. But for him to convert, it would take a miracle on the battlefield. In 496, Clovis received a call for help from his colleague Sigebert, king of the Ripuarian Franks. His people had been routed by the Alemanni, a group of German tribes who threatened to expand westward. Clovis promptly mustered his army and marched east to clash with the Alemanni at the Battle of Zülpich, modern-day Germany, not far from the border with Belgium. According to Gregory of Tours, the Alemanni initially had the upper hand. Seeing his army being slaughtered, Clovis raised his eyes to heaven, burst into tears, and cried, "Jesus Christ, whom Clotilde asserts to be the Son of the living God, who art said to give aid to those in distress and to bestow victory on those who hope in thee, I beseech the glory of thy aid, with the vow that if thou wilt grant me victory over these enemies..." Well, we'll just cut the quote right there, because according to Gregory, Clovis went on monologuing his prayers for a whole 136-word paragraph. I guess he wasn't that busy, being in the middle of a battle while his men were being slayed. But apparently his cry for help did the trick. As soon as he invoked Christ's help, the tide turned. The Alemanni turned their back and began to disperse in flight. And when they saw that their king was killed, they submitted to the dominion of Clovis. The victory over the Alemanni is undisputed, as it was confirmed by a letter of congratulations sent to Clovis by Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths. The miraculous part, well, you can draw your own conclusions about that. Contemporary historians, such as the earlier quoted Professor Friedman, believe that Gregory may have inserted this version of events to draw parallels between Clovis and Roman Emperor Constantine. Constantine converted to Christianity after his victory at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, and so did Clovis after his victory at Zülpich. On Christmas Day 496, Clovis and 3,000 of his soldiers were baptized at Rheims by Bishop Remy. According to another source, the Chronicle of St. Denis, yet another miracle took place during this ceremony. A dove, white as snow, descended, bearing in his beak a vial of holy oil. A delicious odor exhaled from it. The holy bishop took the vial, and suddenly the dove vanished. Transported with joy at the sight of this notable miracle, the king renounced Satan. Surely Clovis wanted to renounce Satan, but his conversion also bore significant political advantages. After his initial wars of conquest, his main political adversaries, such as the Visigoths, belonged to the Arian faith, while potential allies, such as the Eastern Roman Empire, opposed the heresy. In fact, following the ceremony at Rheims, Clovis received a letter from Anastasius, emperor of Constantinople, appointing him as a friend, patrician, and counselor of the Romans. We shall see later how this friendship would prove fruitful. For the time being, Clovis would only get involved in the internal affairs of the Burgundian kingdom. Sometime before the year 500 AD, King Gundobad of the Burgundians had killed two of his brothers, Gundamar and Chilperic, who, I will remind you, was Clovis' father-in-law. Gundobad now vied for total power against his last surviving brother, Godegersel, a rivalry which erupted in civil war in the year 500. Godegersel asked for Clovis' alliance, promising an annual tribute if the Franks helped him kill or expel Gundobad. Naturally, Clovis was happy to intervene against the man who had killed Clotilde's dad. The Salians marched into Burgundian lands, which led Gundobad to believe that the Franks were aiming to swallow his kingdom wholesale. The worried king sent a message to Godegersel to the effect of, "Dude, how about we put aside our differences and join forces against our common foe, yeah?" To which Godegersel replied with something like, "Yeah, man, sounds good. All right." The three armies met by the river Ouche near Dijon. At this point, Godegersel may have uttered something to the effect of, sorry bro, and then he revealed his true allegiance, teaming up with Clovis to charge against Gundobad. The allied armies crushed Gundobad's forces, and the king himself had to escape to the safety of Avignon, a heavily fortified city in the south. At this point, Godegersel warmly thanked Clovis, promised him part of the Burgundian territory, and left the campaign. His priority was to stage a triumph in Gundobad's capital, Vienne, just south of Lyon. But Clovis was not one for giving up a good fight, and he pursued Gundobad to Avignon. His forces alone, however, were not enough to break through the city's defenses. The siege dragged on to a stalemate, which was broken only through deceit. One of Gundobad's advisors pretended to defect to the Frankish side, promising Clovis an annual tribute if he lifted the siege. Clovis accepted the deal and returned to his kingdom, leaving it to the two brothers to sort out their issues. It appears that Gundobad only paid the first installment of the tribute, by the way. With the Franks now gone, Gundobad was free to besiege Vienne. In 501, the city fell, and Godegersel was killed. After the Burgundian adventure, Clovis came into conflict with the Visigoths of King Alaric II. According to one source, the Salians and the Visigoths may have been embroiled in a short war already in 498, which had no significant impact on their borders. War broke out again in 507. It's not clear why, but according to Gregory of Tours, this may have been a religious conflict. Clovis wanted to protect Catholic bishops who were being harassed by Alaric, an Arian king. King Theodoric of the Ostrogoths, also of Arian faith, wished to intervene alongside Alaric. You see, his daughter Theodegotha was married to Alaric. How could he not fight alongside his son-in-law? On the other hand, his wife was Audofleda, sister of Clovis. How could he fight against his brother-in-law? Think of the awkward silence as a Christmas lunch. Eventually, this impasse was solved by the Eastern Roman Emperor Anastasius. The emperor had a policy of supporting Catholic monarchs against Arian ones. As Theodoric owed alliance to Anastasius, he was simply ordered not to intervene. So Alaric had to fight alone, unlike Clovis, who forged alliances with his old foe Gundobad and with Cloderic, the son of his old friend Sigebert of the Ripuarian Franks. The opposing sides clashed at Vouillers, close to Poitiers in central France. As usual, Gregory is scant on details, telling us only that the Goths had fled as was their custom, which is a bit unfair as the Goths were renowned warriors, but they were Arians while Gregory was Catholic, so he might have been a bit biased. In the aftermath of the battle, Alaric was slain, while Clovis and his buddy Cloderic seized Bordeaux, Toulouse, and Angoulême. Gregory gives us a realistic account of this later siege. The Lord gave him, Clovis, such grace that the walls fell down of their own accord when he gazed at them. Then he drove the Goths out and brought the city under his own dominion. In the meanwhile, the Burgundian allies had opened another front, besieging the city of Arles in 508. Only then Theodoric was able to intervene. He invaded what is modern-day Provence and kicked out the Burgundians. At the end of the war, the Visigoths had retained control of Septimania, the western part of France's Mediterranean coast, as well as their Spanish territories. But the vast province of Aquitaine had been annexed by Clovis to his ever-expanding Frankish kingdom. The defeat of the Visigoths came with another reward, directly from Emperor Anastasius, the appointment of Clovis as Roman consul. After defeating the Visigoths, Clovis established his capital in Paris. With little threats coming from outside, Clovis turned his bellicose attention to his allies. His first goal was to absorb the kingdom of Ripuarian Franks. To do so, he conspired with Cloderic, son of Sigebert, convincing him to kill his own father and inherit the kingdom. Cloderic agreed and had Sigebert assassinated. He then sent a message to Clovis, asking him to send some of his men to collect Siegert's treasure. When Clovis's envoys showed up, one of them lifted his axe and split Cloderic's skull in two. The crafty Clovis then rode out to meet the Ripuarian chieftains to give them the bad news that both their king and their prince had been slain by brigands. Reportedly, his words were, "I am in no way an accomplice in these deeds, for I cannot shed the blood of my kinsfolk." But since the deed was done, he continued, "How about the Ripuarians accept him as king?" And they did, raising him on their shields. Next on his hit list were Chiraric and Ragnachar. If you remember, these were cousins to Clovis, who had supported him in his first war against Syagrius. Well, Ragnachar at least, as Chiraric had sat on the fence to the very end. Initially, Clovis forced Chiraric and his son into priesthood, thus nullifying their military threat. But Chiraric's son, surely not the sharpest tool in the shed, spread the word that he would eventually mete out revenge on Clovis. Naturally, Chiraric Senior and Junior had their heads chopped off. Clovis absorbed his kingdom and moved on to Ragnachar. Clovis sent envoys to bribe some of Ragnachar's chieftains. The dupes didn't realize that these precious gifts were actually only gold-plated, and they switched sides, inviting Clovis to invade Ragnachar's kingdom. The treacherous chieftains then reassured Ragnachar and his brother Richard that Clovis's army was weak compared to theirs. The two brothers went to war confidently, but their forces were crushed by the Salians. They were then captured and brought before Clovis with their hands tied behind their backs. According to Gregory, Clovis berated them for allowing themselves to be taken captive and immediately killed them with his axe. The final named victim of Clovis's spree was another brother of Ragnachar, King Rignomer. He was assassinated at Mons, modern-day Belgium, with his kingdom annexed by Clovis. What is most surprising is that after this massacre of his own cousins, the Frankish king had the cheek to complain about his loneliness. "Woe to me, who have remained as a stranger among foreigners, and have none of my kinsmen to give me aid if adversity comes." Clovis would not have to complain about solitude for much longer. In November of 511, the Frankish king died of unknown causes. As per Frankish custom, his dominion was split equally amongst his 4 sons, a decision which led to a period of instability and struggle. But I'd like to focus on Clovis's long-term legacy. His methods may have been questionable, albeit in line with Frankish custom. His results, however, have been exceptional. Starting as the teenage king of a small Frankish state, he had succeeded in uniting most of western and northern France, as well as annexing large territories east of the Rhine. He had created a stable state which combined laws and customs from the Roman, German, and Christian traditions. He had founded a dynasty, the Merovingians, that was destined to rule for almost 3 centuries. French scholars, artists, and politicians alike later considered him to be the founding father of the French nation. To quote General Charles de Gaulle, "To me, the history of France begins with Clovis."